The American Television Academy says it's voted to begin disciplinary proceedings against disgraced film mogul Harvey Weinstein. The Academy, which bestows the Emmy Award, says a hearing has been set for next month to consider a termination of membership. The so-called Weinstein effect has prompted scrutiny on sexual harassment across other industries as well, including fashion, with many models sharing their stories on social media.
Now here to discuss this and other industry news is fashion journalist Patty Huntington. Good morning to you. Oh my goodness, the ripples from the issues around Harvey.
I would have thought, actually.
Yeah.
It's just opened the floodgates across every industry, and look, you know, obviously not before time.
No.
I mean, it really has been described as a watershed moment. In the aftermath, obviously, of the Weinstein scandal, there's been a number of things, the Me Too hashtag, and there's another one called, you know, My Job Should Not Include Abuse, which was launched by an American model by the name of Cameron Russell. Now, she's sort of become a bit of an activist, and she did a TED Talk a couple of years ago about, you know, being a model and being judged on her looks. But she started sharing models' experiences on on her Instagram feed, any anonymous stories about sort of sexual harassment and abuse. And so far there's over 70. But of course, if you look at, for example, France, they've had a campaign called hashtag Balance ton porc, which I think means, you know, out or, you know, expose your pig. And they've had something like 300,000 responses. And leading to France considering introducing on-the-spot fines for sort of on street sexual harassment.
Well, I mean, we talk about the Weinstein effects.
Yeah.
So you feel as though this really has emboldened people to come forward now and tell their stories. And I guess we shouldn't be surprised that these stories are emerging from the fashion industry.
Not at all. And it's been going on for a very long time. I'm not sure if you recall, back in 1998, the BBC did an undercover investigation where they sent a reporter and a crew undercover with a hidden camera into Italy and exposed, you know, young models being offered sort of drugs for sex. And that really shook up the modelling world. But there's been many complaints over the years. In December last year, or sorry, November, David Hamilton, who was a very big name in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you know, revered across the fashion industry, you know, advertising, you know, did campaigns for Nina Ricci, and also did a number of films like Bilitis. A French TV anchor by the name of Flavie Flament did an autobiography called The Consolation, and she talked about her rape at the age of 13 at the hands of an unknown or anonymous photographer. And on the front cover, she used an image that was taken of her by David Hamilton when she was 13. That then sort of came out into the open. Another 3 women accused him of historic rape, and he flatly denied the charges, said it was a witch hunt, and it was, and then wound up sort of taking his own life. So, I mean, he's not there to face sort of the legal repercussions. Although I must say, in France, there's a statute of limitations on rape, and which is somewhat incredible, especially when you're considering children. We've had a number of other high-profile sort of men in the spotlight in the fashion industry in recent years. First and foremost, I would have to say Terry Richardson and Dov Charney from American Apparel. Now, Terry Richardson is was a very high-profile photographer. You know, fated one of the highest paid in the industry by the magazines, brands, and models started coming forward about sort of the sorts of things that were going on behind the scenes. With
Well, not just models, but like the likes
celebrities.
of Miley Cyrus.
There's a photo of him with
Barack
Obama,
yeah.
who probably regrets that, especially since he has 2 young daughters. But again, this was 2010 actually, and look, I remember blogging about this before that happened, and people sort of coming out and saying this is like a witch hunt, and it's, you know, it's vindictive, and it's a vendetta against him, and it's like, well, then these stories started coming out, but I mean, I think the difference between the Weinstein thing is that these were household names and very well-known actresses, and he also had 14 months of investigative reporting by the New York Times and the New Yorker. Now, people shouldn't take that for granted. It's very hard to get people on the record, to find the documentation so that, you know, anyone can make a claim, but to back it up and to publish it or broadcast it. So Terry Richardson has since been disgraced. He's also flatly denied everything. And I think many brands and companies have distanced themselves from him. Dov Charney from American Apparel also. He was actually eventually fired by his own board after a spate of sexual harassment allegations, and the company settled with 4 of them.
So, Patty, do you foresee that there will be any ramifications in terms of the way the industry operates and looks at itself, given these
given the number of times it's happened in the past and the number of times people have sort of shaken their heads and said, oh, yes, it's dreadful, and we know lots of people. Cameron Russell, actually, on one of her most recent Instagram posts, said she looks forward to someone doing an investigation, because, of course, she's not not an investigative reporter. She's just helped. She could connect investigators with some of the people who've made claims. But I think it does take. It's going to take quite a lot of digging. And look, are there newspapers, magazines, television outlets prepared to sort of look? Because I have to say there are stories about a number of other high-profile photographers who continue to be very well known, and also against young men too, young guys who are lured to, or made to do things that they obviously later regret.
Patty, I mean, we've heard from the likes of Christy Tellington say that the industry it's surrounded by predators, the models and the like. You have been closely associated with the fashion industry in Australia for such a long time. Is that the case here as well?
Well, you do hear lots of stories about photographers sort of getting, women on their own. I mean, often it is a woman on her own, or there may be studio assistants. So yes, I mean, I've heard. There's not one Australian photographer or particular person that I have heard a number of stories about, like in the case of Terry Richardson in the US. But it is kind of rampant across the industry. I mean, just this week there was a photographer in Newcastle. I think he was a glamour photographer, so not necessarily a fashion photographer, who's just been arrested on a number of charges of sexual harassment and abuse. So of course it's there. And why does this happen? I mean, why is it that Harvey Weinstein was accused by a television anchor of masturbating in front of her? Dov Charney was also accused by a journalist who I believe was interviewing him of masturbating. I mean, there needs to be zero tolerance of this. And if you know about it, don't stay quiet and let's see whether something can be done, because clearly there's not enough codes of conduct in place.
Well, it sounds like people are calling it out a lot more these days. But let's turn our attention to the other side of the fashion business, and that's dollars and cents, because we've had basically the story of highs and lows. You talked about the high-low fashion trend. Well, it's also following on in terms of earnings for businesses, because we had some stories of downsides for particularly Myer, Oroton and Billabong, but not all bad news, was it?
Well, yeah, I sort of call it's the worst of times and it's the best of times in Australian retail, because it's the domestic retailers, let's clarify. I mean, sure, Topshop...
Well, I mean, they are under pressure, aren't they?
They are. It's been described to me by various analysts as the most competitive retail environment in Australia's history, and Amazon has yet to arrive.
I know, they're coming though.
That's right. I mean, people like Cotton On, if you look at Cotton On in Australia, which hasn't had the 20% growth it's had in recent years, but I mean, they aim to be Australia's Zara and H&M, and they have, they've been having growth. And I mean, they're on record that we're already competing with Amazon outside Australia. So the thing is that these people have had the market to themselves for a long time. And sure, the macro conditions are tough. I mean, we've got skyrocketing electricity prices, low wage growth, high household debt.
Well, that's right, and you would think the discretionary spending would suffer immensely, but we're also seeing the international luxury brands pile into Australia, and people are buying it.
They are. I mean, Gucci has said that its sales are flying in Australia. Most brands are saying double digits. Gucci has said in some categories triple digits. So what is it about Gucci? Well, they've got a new creative director. I mean, Gucci wasn't always the hottest brand. I mean, you've had Tom Ford and then a series of others, but this current guy is just doing, campaigns. I mean, we talked about how he was accused of copying, but he's just taking ideas and sort of throwing it out there, and it's really appealing, particularly to the millennial market. So, and there's other Australian companies that are doing well as well. I mean, if you look at the luxury end, so Cotton On is at the basic sort of end, or the fast fashion end, but people like Pas Paley Pearls, I mean, they are opening stores around Australia. I mean, there's a general manager, and he said, I feel terrible when I read these stories about people doing badly because we're doing so well. So this is the top end of the market, and many others. I mean, the Australian designers like Zimmerman, Camilla, Dion Lee. I mean, if they have some backing, or they have a strong sort of, financial infrastructure, and then they're in a position to sort of capitalise, I guess. But you have to be doing something, with a point of difference, and that's what sort of analysts sort of say to me. There's no easy money out there at the moment, and if what you're doing isn't appealing, or you're just doing the same old, what I think is really interesting is that we're starting to see more and more CEOs on record that mea culpa. It's not just, in fact, the CEO of Billabong, when they were on an earnings call a couple of months ago, said, look, I just want to clarify, it's not just the market conditions. We got it wrong. And we were talking recently about the new high-cut swimwear trend with the thong. And he, has talked about the fact that consumers were coming into stores with their Instagram feeds and celebrities, and they were offering the same sort of swimsuits from the year before. So in America, they were sort of much more on trend, but I mean, and they've since introduced that product here. But a couple of David Jones has said they got things wrong on the execution of their own labels, and I mean even Solomon Lew, who is agitating the Myer board at the moment, which is what he does best. I mean even his company, Premier Investments. I mean the growth is being sort of fueled by the children's brand Smiggle and Peter Alexander, which is a luxury sleepwear. But the fashion brands suffered too, and they have sacked their design directors and brought in new teams. So it's about being competitive.
Well, we are going to have to get that house in order because, as we said, Amazon is coming. We'll check in with you when we see a little bit more on the horizon there, Patty Huntington. Thank you very much for speaking with us.